What is up everyone, I'm CB Emer Productions. Today we'll be discussing the first show of the DCEU, which revolves around one of the standouts of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, having to reluctantly team up with a task force to stop an alien invasion, but also learning more about himself along the way, whilst keeping the peace, no matter how bloody or violent. Peacemaker. This was a show that was announced around like a year and a half ago, well before the release of the Suicide Squad, and looking at it from a face value sort of view, mostly knowing John Cena from being the butt of a lot of memes in the mid-2010s.
I swear I'm about to call the police.
Hello. You have a collect call from
John Cena!
Will you accept the charges?
Oh, your mother.
I'm John Cena!
早上好，中国！现在我有冰淇淋，我很喜欢冰淇淋。
And his biggest acting role to me outside WWE was playing Fred Ficklehorn's dad in those Fred made-for-TV movies on Nickelodeon, where he would just come out of a fridge and like tell his son advice, while also beating his son up in the process. Very much like how Peacemaker's dad beats him up in this show. As a whole, I really didn't know what to expect from the show, as soon as I had known the character from the comics, and we hadn't seen the Suicide Squad yet, and it would be like a year before we'd actually see it. I was optimistic because of James Gunn, but I kind of just put it on the back burner. Then around 10-11 months later when we did get the Suicide Squad, it actually ended up being my favorite film of last year, and I ended up loving John Cena's Peacemaker. I thought it was one of the standouts of the film, I thought it was really funny, but also he was quite dark in the film, and he did a lot of, questionable things that made me wonder why he would specifically get his own HBO Max series before anyone else in that movie. But once again, loving a lot of James Gunn's work and knowing that he would write all the episodes and direct the majority of them, my excitement rose a lot more after the Suicide Squad, and I always started looking forward to the series. And now with all 8 episodes released on HBO Max for everyone's viewing pleasure right now, at least in countries that have this service, along with the show now being renewed for a second season around the time the finale dropped, does it live up to the hype and the quality of the Suicide Squad, or is this yet another stumble in the DCEU? Well, let's get into the show and find out. This show is unequivocally James Gunn's own. Similar to the Suicide Squad, James Gunn does not hold back in this show whatsoever. In a lot of areas, this show does push the boundaries a lot more than the Suicide Squad did, considering it's on streaming, and when you're on streaming, you really don't have to worry much about censorship. I'm glad we're in an era right now, which we've been in for quite a few years at this point, where directors and writers are allowed to insert a lot more of the comic book wackiness of the source material into their shows and movies, and not have to worry about the mainstream audiences, because they're a lot more accepting of what's on the screen versus, them having to mute a lot of the stuff down like in the early 2000s with all the other early comic book movies. And immediately James Gunn was one of the people that really did push that boundary with his first 2 Guardians films from Marvel, but it's even more absurd in this show. It's just great that across the board now that a lot of these comic movies and shows don't have to worry about, stripping a lot of these characters of their characteristics that really made them stand out memorable in the comics and why people loved them in the first place. And this show is entirely in that direction. From the opening dance number title sequence of the first episode, from the final fight in that bar with all the aliens in the final episode, there's not one moment in the show to where it compromises itself to be more mainstream. It's comfortable in its own skin, and that's great to see from a creative standpoint. Now, getting from behind the camera into who's in front of the camera, the acting across the board is great. Every member of this Task Force X side team that we get in these 8 episodes are so much fun to watch, and their banter is off the charts good. Some of these characters we've already seen in the Suicide Squad, such as Hardcore, of course Peacemaker, and Diebeard, as I like to call him, but they get a lot more dimension in the show than they did get in the Suicide Squad, especially the characters that were just behind the offices just watching Task Force X do their thing. Despite these characters aren't the most developed from the get-go, as this season develops, these characters get a lot more time to shine as the team does get to bond like a family. Not to mention Trevor Holland and Steve Agee saw these characters in their own respective ways, with Hardcore tearing the Peacemaker throughout the season, and Economos aka Diebeard just reluctantly tagging along to this wild adventure, being the audience essentially, and then getting to the characters that were in the Suicide Squad that are completely brand new for the show. We first have Daniel Brooks at Adebayo, the daughter of Amanda Waller, who is great in many aspects of the show. She's great at ripping off this entire team, especially Peacemaker, and their dynamic is one of the strongest bonds of the entire show. She can be emotional when she needs to be, she can be badass when she needs to be, she can be hilarious when she needs to be. She sells it all in spades. We also have Chuck Woody Iwuji, sorry if I pronounce it wrong, as Myrn, who's also very good at playing the straight-faced leader of the group, being the glue that holds this team together, and eventually when you realize he's one of the aliens that this group is trying to eradicate, was quite a surprise and it leads to a lot of internal conflict amongst his character, not only with the team but explaining why he's doing what he's doing, and why he's trying to make a species go extinct. And instead of leading to Hardcore ultimately becoming the leader of the group and fulfilling her character arc throughout the season, was also very well done. But one of the stands of this show that we cannot overlook is of course Freddie Stroma as Adrian Chase, aka Vigilante. His wacky obsession with Peacemaker and his wide array of quirky jokes, and the occasional lack of empathy towards killing people, makes his character one of the most memorable aspects of this entire show. And then there's the great Robert Patrick as Peacemaker's father. One of the main two antagonists of the season that you just love to hate, and you want to see Peacemaker overcome his father and overcome his struggles with him. And just bringing the justice for not only the torment he brought onto him for his childhood, but to all the people that he's just affected through his discriminatory attitude. And all the other smaller side roles are acted well alongside that. From Hutley as Juno Master, this wacky bodyguard of sorts just destroys anyone on a one-on-one fight that doesn't involve a card and shovels to the skull multiple times. Annie Chang as Sophia Song, a cop that is way too genuine in the corrupt world, that ends up tragically getting the better of her, and then when she becomes a vessel of our main villain of the season in Goth, the head of the Butterflies, she's great at playing that side as well, along with the partner Larry, who I recognize immediately as the cop that got electrocuted in Freddy vs. Jason, so I'm glad he's still getting work. And then there's also Autobio's wife Kia, who's sweet in the very few scenes we see her in. There's also the janitor Jamil, he's great as well, and even the cameos such as Viola Davis reprising her roles of Amanda Waller for a couple cameo scenes in a couple episodes, and even getting Jason Momoa and Ezra Miller to reprise their roles as a Flash and Aquaman in the finale is great as well, and just shows the balls of DC that they are allowing these mainstream versions of these characters to just be as vulgar as they are in this finale for the very few lines they get. But the main star of the show that I have yet to talk about is of course the main star, John Cena as Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker. As the head of the series, he does a great job making this character that was on the fence being a good guy in Suicide Squad who ended up actually falling on the bad side and killing Rick Flag. And having James Gunn of all people turn this bad guy that honestly wasn't super sympathetic in the Suicide Squad into being this really vulnerable guy that you completely understand why he became a bad guy through his father's instincts and his father's torment growing up. And you can tell throughout the season that he realizes his mistakes and he wants to become a better person. He wants to move away from his father and his previous life as the Peacemaker. And him wanting to change as a human being is just fantastic from a writing point of view. And also John Cena just really selling this character. From all the different sides, he can be badass, he can be funny, he can be very emotional. He's a very well-rounded character, and this is the first role I've seen in John Cena's career that he can become an actual legitimate actor. And if he can choose more roles like this in the future that can really show up his persona and really just fit what he can do in his strengths, he can have a Rock-sized level career and not just do boring roles like playing like the knockoff Rock character in F9, but more roles like this that allow him to push the boundaries of his career even more. Because this role is by a mile the best he's ever done in his entire career thus far. Now speaking more on the story, it does a good job of surprising you with how the story goes throughout these 8 episodes. Of how we get these characters established into the story, and then turning what we think is just another mercenary job for Peacemaker into his entire alien invasion corrupt storyline. That's just right at home for James Gunn. And then the ultimate reveal of what the plan of the Butterflies is to teleport this gigantic cow creature thing that supplies them with food away from Task Force X in the US, and the whole design of it and just the whole tone and atmosphere of this entire show just screams James Gunn, which is just right at James Gunn's wheelhouse, and no matter how absurd some things may get, you can just go along with it, which is one of the more stronger aspects of his writing. The writing also allows for a lot of these characters to naturally have arcs, and have the story move at a pace to where not a whole lot in the season feels like it gets rushed, or had to jump a shark a bit to reach a conclusion because they ran out of screen time, which is an issue I've had with a lot of these streaming service shows, especially in the Marvel Disney Plus ones. And the comedic time is also very good at balancing the dark humor with also having the more emotional moments and feeling grounded, and giving each member of the show at least one major moment that you walk away from the show remembering what they did. And having to electritize to the DCEU to me makes the show feel more important. It's not a major part of the show, but it does make it feel more, streamlined in the DCU versus just this little spin-off thing that James Gunn decided to make on a weekend. Even if Warner Bros. And DC is not playing a giant crossover in the near future, it's so cool having all these little tie-ins and characters pop in and out. Now from a directing standpoint, a lot of the action, for the most part, is handled well, and does fit the consistency of the Suicide Squad. And the VFX as well are also really good. It's showing that DC is giving respective big movie-sized budgets to these shows, not just giving, CW budgets that we've seen with a lot of these DC shows previously. And how bizarre some of the effects in the show are, it wouldn't have worked as well if DC didn't have much money backing behind the show as it did. And the same goes for the costume and production design. It gives them very vibrant and comic accurate costumes. Most notably Vigilante, the White Dragon, Judo Master, and all the different helmets that Peacemaker wears. And we can't discuss a James Gunn comic property without discussing the soundtrack, which is as great as ever. With so many underseen gems I hadn't heard before, that fit the atmosphere of so many scenes well, that just oozes of what's going on and just elevates it so much more. And overall, this is just a season I had a complete blast with. And I just can't wait to see what the second season of the show is going to look like, along the other Suicide Squad spin-offs of James Gunn's plan that will come down the pipe soon. And despite how much I'll miss him at Marvel after he finishes off Guardians 3, I'm honestly more interested to see what his future at DC is. Considering that so far in the DC universe, he's been able to do whatever he's wanted and not be held back in the fear of Disney executives shutting him down, which is refreshing to see. And it might be one of the patriarchs to really elevate DC in a whole new level that can actually compete with Marvel, which they really haven't been in that position since the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy almost a decade ago. Which will be exciting to see because the more these two giants compete, the more quality content we'll get out of it because that's really what they're fighting over, which will make it better for all of us viewers in the long run. Now, there's not a whole lot that I disliked in this first season, But there are a couple things that did bother me throughout these 8 episodes, and I do have to discuss them because I'm reviewing it. Firstly, I was worried a bit after watching the first episode, which in retrospect is probably my least favorite episode of the series, that John Cena's Peacemaker wouldn't really act or feel like the same Peacemaker as in the Suicide Squad. What I mean by that is that from the first scene of the first episode, there was something off about John Cena's performance where he felt a lot more quirky and, goofy than he was previously as character, which was only like a few months time difference between the two. And it seemed like there was kind of a jump and there was like no transition period between him acting like the self-righteous soldier in the Suicide Squad, and I was kind of acting like he kind of acted in Blockers and a few of the other comedic roles he's done where he just kind of acts goofy and just over the top. Luckily, that worry was seized as the season progressed, and it didn't just rely on Peacemaker just being a joke machine, as we got to learn more of his backstory and realize why he acts the way he does. And he does overall have a very good arc in this season, especially accepting who he is and learning to live with his past demons, especially when taking out his father, who's basically the main source of his, rage and all of his anger growing up. But I do wish there was a little bit more transition period between the Suicide Squad Peacemaker and this show's Peacemaker, because it was still kind of a bit of a jump between the two characters. And the only reason I suggest that the reason the creatives did that is just so they weren't worried about having an unlikable John Cena for the first like 2 or 3 episodes. I went along with it overall, but it did kind of bother me in some certain scenes early on. Another big issue I did have with this show is the action. While the big scale action sequences were pretty solid, like Peacemaker fighting that butterfly woman in the first episode or the gigantic farm fight in the finale, a lot of the hand-to-hand fights are edited pretty poorly. Do they have any stock generic editing trick of cutting every single time someone throws a punch? And as someone who notices the making of films and TV shows growing up more and more and wanting to work in the film industry, I can't stand when films and TV shows are edited like this to hide all the fight choreography and such, or lack thereof. It wasn't terrible, but it did kind of bother me in some action sequences. And despite I did enjoy Vigilante in this season, I do feel like he was funnier and had a bit more personality when he did have his mask on. To me, whenever you did see Adrian Chase without the mask, a little bit of that magic that Vigilante had just kind of goes away once he takes the mask off, and his personality becomes slightly more annoying for some reason. Especially when he's established to be a wanted criminal for the crimes he's committed. That's why he keeps his identity a secret early on, yet in some of the later episodes he'll just walk around in the suit but not the mask on, in full broad daylight. It just didn't really make much sense to me. I did feel like the whole Robert Patrick storyline did clash with the Butterfly storyline a little bit, especially in episode 7 where both stories were concurrently going on. And the whole fight with Peacemaker and the White Dragon did feel slightly rushed in my opinion, a little bit underwhelming. I felt like in a different world, this could have worked better if it was just saved for a second season versus being a side storyline in this first season. But apart from that, this is a damn good first season. Overall, Peacemaker Season 1 is a fantastic start to the DCEU TV era of their universe. It is a really funny show with a lot of heart in there as well, a lot of great banter from our main team that all get development, a lot of fun side characters along the way, both good and bad, a villain with a reason for why they're doing the things they're doing, it keeps the pace up, it has some pretty good surprises along the way, a great soundtrack, really good VFX, satisfying character arcs, great production design and costume design, and it's so unabashedly James Gunn that you just can't help but have a good time while watching it. There are a couple issues that hold it back regarding a couple of the main characters, and some of the action, but as a whole, this is definitely one of the better superhero shows I've seen in a long time, and I can't wait to see not only what the future of this show has in store, but what the future of the DC Universe will look like with James Gunn involved. Because if his upcoming projects do keep the quality the same level as this show does, then it's going to be a hell of a fun ride. I give Peacemaker Season 1 an A-, a 9 out of 10, and a must-watch recommendation. So that's Peacemaker, what do you guys think about it? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. I'm CBM Productions, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.